himself. Later he states his ethical position. 6.421. It is clear that ethics cannot be put into words. Ethics is transcendental. Ethics and aesthetics are one and the same. 6.43. If the good or bad exercise of the will does alter the world, it can alter only the limits of the world, not the facts, not what can be expressed by means of language. He reveals that his attitude is essentially mystical. 6.432. How things are in the world is a matter of complete indifference to what is higher. God does not reveal himself in the facts. This leads him to denigrate philosophy. 6.53. The correct method in philosophy would really be the following: to say nothing except what can be said, i.e., propositions of natural science, i.e., something that has nothing to do with philosophy, and then, whenever someone else wanted to say something metaphysical, to demonstrate to him that he had failed to give a meaning to certain signs in his propositions. He then modestly denigrates his own philosophy. 6.54. My propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical, when he has used them, as steps, to climb up beyond them. He must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up it. This leads to his final controversial conclusion. 7. What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, translated by Piers and McGuinness. In his later work, Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein reduces his philosophy to linguistic analysis. 30. So one might say, the ostensive definition explains the use, the meaning, of the word when the overall role of the word in language is clear. He gives an example. Thus, if I know that someone means to explain a color word to me, the ostensive definition, that is called sepia, will help me to understand the word. And you can say this so long as you do not forget that all sorts of problems attach to the words to know or to be clear. He elaborates with a further example. 31. When one shows someone the king in chess and says, "This is the king," this does not tell him the use of the piece, unless he already knows the rules of the game up to this last point, the shape of the king. You could imagine him having learned the rules of the game without ever having been shown an actual piece. The shape of the chessman corresponds here to the sound or shape of the word. This eventually leads him to the conclusion, 123. A philosophical problem has the form, "I don't know my way about." But he warns, 124, philosophy may in no way interfere with the actual use of language. It can in the end only describe it, for it cannot give it any foundation either. It leaves everything as it is. As a result, the scope of philosophy is reduced. 125. It is the business of philosophy not to resolve a contradiction by means of a mathematical or logic-mathematical discovery, but to make it possible for us to get a clear view of the state of affairs before the contradiction is resolved, and this does not mean that one is sidestepping a difficulty. This leads to a tangled situation from which it appears almost impossible to escape. The fundamental fact here is that we lay down rules, a technique for a game, and that when we then follow the rules, things do not turn out as we had assumed, that we are therefore, as it were, entangled in our own rules. The entanglement in our rules is what we want to understand, i.e., get a clear view of. Philosophical Investigations, translated by G.E.M. Anscombe. Wittgenstein insisted upon logic, and in doing so imposed severe limits upon philosophical thinking. Indeed, many have come to see this as a stranglehold which prevents us from thinking about matters that have been the traditional concerns of philosophy. In light of this, it is instructive to see how logic was viewed in the previous century by Nietzsche. Suppose there was no self-identical A, such as is assumed by every proposition of logic and mathematics, and this A was already a mere appearance. In this case, logic would merely be about a world of appearances. In fact, we believe in this proposition merely because our experience seems always to confirm it. The thing, this is what really underlies A. Our belief in things, this is the precondition of our belief in logic. Our very first acts of thought, affirmation and denial, decisions about truth and untruth, are already influenced by our belief that we can discover true knowledge, that our judgments can be the truth. This is the origin of our basic sensualistic prejudice that sensations tell us the truth about the world, that I cannot simultaneously maintain that a thing is hard and that it is also soft. The conceptual ban on contradiction stems from our belief that we can form concepts, that those concepts not only specify the essence of a thing, but also understand it. In fact, logic, just like geometry and arithmetic, applies only to fictions of our own creation. Logic is our attempt to understand the actual world by using a scheme which we ourselves have made up. In other words, to make it amenable to schemes of formula and calculation which we have invented for ourselves alone. Will to Power, section 516. In Culture and Value, Wittgenstein reflects on a wider range of topics beyond the realms of logic and logical philosophy. Here he reveals many of the traits that made him such a difficult customer in everyday life. The reason why I cannot understand Shakespeare is that I want to find symmetry in all this asymmetry. His pieces give an impression as of enormous sketches rather than of paintings, as though they had been dashed off by someone who can permit himself anything. Anyone who admires them as one admires, say, Beethoven, seems to me to misunderstand Shakespeare. The arrogance of this remark speaks for itself, and how anyone who doesn't understand Shakespeare, and so aptly demonstrates this, can claim that those who do understand Shakespeare misunderstand him, can be clear only to a master logician. Alas, Wittgenstein never encountered the schoolmaster, who once said to me, "I'd like to hear your opinion on this piece of Beethoven. And remember, it is not Beethoven who is being examined here." When judging another great artist, Wittgenstein reveals a trait that constantly recurred in his dealings with others. If it is true that Mahler's music is worthless, as I believe to be the case, then the question is what I think he ought to have done with his talent. Should he, say, have written his symphonies and then burned them? Or should he have done violence to himself and not written them? Should he have written them and realized that they were worthless? But how could he have realized that? I can see it, because I can compare his music with what the great composers wrote, but he could not, because his nature is not that of other great composers. Culture and Value, translated by Peter Winch. Such remarks would be laughable if Wittgenstein had not put them into practice. He had a nasty habit of interfering drastically in the lives of those around him. He browbeat his friend Skinner into abandoning a brilliant academic career and becoming a factory hand. Someone who sought advice about becoming a surgeon in the Royal Army Medical Corps was told he should volunteer for the front as a private. While at Cambridge, Wittgenstein also spent considerable effort trying to persuade the leading literary critic F.R. Leavis that he was not suited to the study of English literature and should give it up. This, from the man who admitted that he didn't understand Shakespeare. Chronology of Wittgenstein's life. 1889, Ludwig Wittgenstein, born in Vienna, April 26. 1906, goes to Berlin to study engineering. 1908, registers as research student at Manchester University, England. 1912, admitted to Trinity College, Cambridge, to study logic with Bertrand Russell. 1914, volunteers for Austro-Hungarian army upon outbreak of World War I. 1918, taken prisoner of war in Italy. 1920, becomes schoolteacher in remote Austrian village of Trattenbach. 1921, first publication of Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus in Annalen der Naturphilosophie, first appears in book form with English translation a year later. 1927, discusses philosophy with Vienna Circle in Vienna. 1929, returns to Cambridge. 1930, becomes Fellow of Trinity College. 1939, elected Professor of Philosophy at Cambridge. 1940, works as a porter at a London hospital. 1947, resigns chair at Cambridge and moves to remote cottage in Ireland. 1951, dies at the age of 62 of cancer in Cambridge. Chronology of Wittgenstein's era. 1889, erection of Eiffel Tower in Paris. 1900, death of Nietzsche. Freud publishes The Interpretation of Dreams. 1903, Curies awarded Nobel Prize for discovery of radioactivity. 1905, Einstein publishes Special Theory of Relativity. 1912, Sinking of the Titanic. 1913, Bohr proposes quantum theory. 1914 to 1918, World War I. 1917, Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. 1919, disintegration of Austro-Hungarian Empire. 1922, Schlick founds Vienna Circle, publication of Joyce's Ulysses and Eliot's The Waste Land. 1927, Heidegger publishes Being and Time. 1929, Wall Street crash heralds era of the Great Depression. 1939 to 1945, World War II. 1945, explosion of first atomic bomb, founding of United Nations, era of existentialism in Paris. 1948 to 1949, Berlin airlift. 1950, outbreak of Korean War. Chronology of significant philosophical dates. 6th century BC, the beginning of Western philosophy with Thales of Miletus. End of the 6th century BC, death of Pythagoras. 399 BC, Socrates sentenced to death in Athens. Circa 387 BC, Plato founds the Academy in Athens, the first university. 335 BC, Aristotle founds the Lyceum in Athens, a rival school to the Academy. 324 AD, Emperor Constantine moves capital of Roman Empire to Byzantium. 400 AD, St. Augustine writes his Confessions, philosophy absorbed into Christian theology. 410 AD, sack of Rome by Visigoths heralds opening of Dark Ages. 529 AD, closure of Academy in Athens by Emperor Justinian marks end of Hellenic thought. Mid-13th century, Thomas Aquinas writes his commentaries on Aristotle, era of scholasticism. 1453, fall of Byzantium to Turks, end of Byzantine Empire. 1492, Columbus reaches America, Renaissance in Florence and revival of interest in Greek learning. 1543, Copernicus publishes On the Revolution of the Celestial Orbs, proving mathematically that the earth revolves around the sun. 1633, Galileo forced by Church to recant heliocentric theory of the universe. 1641, Descartes publishes his Meditations, the start of modern philosophy. 1677, death of Spinoza allows publication of his Ethics. 1687, Newton publishes Principia, introducing concept of gravity. 1689, Locke publishes Essay Concerning Human Understanding, start of empiricism. 1710, Berkeley publishes Principles of Human Knowledge, advancing empiricism to new extremes. 1716, death of Leibniz. 1739 to 1740, Hume publishes Treatise of Human Nature, taking empiricism to its logical limits. 1781, Kant, awakened from his dogmatic slumbers by Hume, publishes Critique of Pure Reason. Great era of German metaphysics begins. 1807, Hegel publishes The Phenomenology of Mind, high point of German metaphysics. 1818, Schopenhauer publishes The World as Will and Representation, introducing Indian philosophy into German metaphysics. 1889, Nietzsche, having declared God is dead, succumbs to madness in Turin. 1921, Wittgenstein publishes Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, claiming the final solution to the problems of philosophy. 1920s. Vienna Circle propounds logical positivism. 1927. Heidegger publishes Being and Time, heralding split between analytical and continental philosophy. 1943. Sartre publishes Being and Nothingness, advancing Heidegger's thought and instigating existentialism. 1953. Posthumous publication of Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations, high era of linguistic analysis. This concludes the reading of Wittgenstein in 90 Minutes by Paul Strathern. The book was read by Robert Whitfield. For other audiobooks from the Philosophers in 90 Minutes series, or if you would like to obtain a complete printed catalogue of our titles or our monthly update telling you about new releases and our new collection of books on CD, write to Blackstone Audiobooks, P.O. Box 969, Ashland, Oregon 97520, or call 1-800-SAY-BOOK. That's 1-800-729-2665. You may also obtain the same information from our award-winning website. Our address, all one word, is www.blackstoneaudio.com. Thank you. .53. The correct method in philosophy would really be the following: to say nothing except what can be said, i.e., propositions of natural science, i.e., something that has nothing to do with philosophy, and then, whenever someone else wanted to say something metaphysical, to demonstrate to him that he had failed to give a meaning to certain signs in his propositions, and up it. This leads to his final controversial conclusion. 7. What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, translated by Piers and McGuinness. In his later work, Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein reduces his philosophy to linguistic analysis. Later he states his ethical position. 6.421. It is clear that ethics cannot be put into words. Ethics is transcendental. Ethics and aesthetics are one and the same. 6.43. If the good or bad exercise of the will does alter the world, it can alter only the limits of the will. He then modestly denigrates his own philosophy. 6.54. My propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical, when he has used them, as steps, to climb up beyond them. He must, so to speak, throw away the ladder, after he has climbed the world, not the facts, not what can be expressed by means of language. He reveals that his attitude is essentially mystical. 6.432. How things are in the world is a matter of complete indifference to what is higher. God does not reveal himself in the facts. This leads him to denigrate philosophy.